Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of Var Valley. Though I played the wrong intro, I played the intro from History Valley. I am your host, DJ Sean Ski, and I'm here today again with Emmet Sweeney. I'd like to thank everyone, first of all, for subscribing to the channel and liking the videos. Thank you very much. Today's topic, did the deluge really happen? We have an action-packed show today with some slides and whatnot. But Emmett, it's up to you, man. Go ahead. You want to take it away for us and talk about, did the deluge really happen?
Yeah,
Emmett?
thanks, Sean.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, when we talk about ancient history, when we talk about the human story, the story of mankind, the earliest event, which we could call historical, the earliest in the memory of human consciousness, I suppose, is what we call the deluge. Now, over the past 150 years, it has become part of kind of accepted mainstream knowledge that the deluge was a myth. It never happened. The great universal flood is just sort of a biblical nonsense, biblical mythology. There's such a thing as impossible, that early human beings might have made up these stories because, heavy rainfall in their locality, they thought the whole world was flooding, and they didn't understand that the world was much bigger than their little local area. Or they might have found seashells high up in mountain ranges, fossilized or otherwise, and thought, well, maybe the sea was up here at one stage. So there are various explanations generally given now in your average textbook or encyclopedia, even, for the deluge stories, which are found universally. By the way, most people in the West are aware of the biblical story and only that. But in fact, it's just one of literally hundreds, possibly thousands, of flood stories, flood legends from throughout the world. And they all tell a very, very similar tale, that the whole earth, or basically almost all the earth, was flooded at some stage, either by heavy, torrential rain lasting many days and many nights, or by vast tidal waves, or in fact, more often than not, a combination of both these things. And very often in the flood stories, as I say, was it James Fraser collected literally hundreds of them. I have accounts of several of them here, which I could sort of summarize, read out a summary of some of them. But from every continent, from the Americas, from Asia, from Africa, Europe, you name it, there are ancient indigenous stories of worldwide deluges, which are quite independent of the biblical story, and which tell a very, very similar tale. Very often in some of these stories, the deluge is remembered as wiping away great animals that existed before that. Native American legends, for example, had actual kind of descriptions of mammoths. And one of them, I think among the Delaware, there was a story noted by Thomas Jefferson, no less, noted how the Great Spirit became angry and swept all these huge creatures away from the face of the earth in a great flood. So these are universal stories. Now, it hasn't been, as I say, since the mid-19th century, since the dawn of the Darwinian age, there has been a tendency, and then it became a dogma, that this event never occurred and it's just a myth. And we now have what is called a uniformitarian view of the Earth's history and of human history. The only things happening now could have happened in the past. Now, I needn't emphasize how totally unscientific that statement is. Just because it doesn't happen now, essentially in uniformitarian thinking, means it couldn't have happened in the past. So we might as well say world wars aren't happening now, so they couldn't have happened in the past. It's just an absurd statement. And yet that is essentially what uniformitarianism says, as opposed to catastrophism. When the scientific age, if you like, began during the 17th, 18th centuries, savants of the time, during the what they call the Enlightenment, began to uncover the bones of extinct creatures of various kinds from various epochs. And the founder of modern paleontology, the study of ancient species, was Georges Cuvier, the French savant. And he was quite convinced by the evidence that he found that cataclysmic events had occurred quite frequently in the Earth's past, including deluges of various kinds. Not one, but many of them, successive ones. And he was quite specific that these events were kind of a worldwide events, and that they exterminated whole species and whole kind of epochs of life. The last of which he dated to the end of what we now call the Pleistocene period, which is essentially the period of the megafauna, the mammoth, mastodon, saber-toothed cat, cave bear, etc. And Cuvier was convinced that the Pleistocene came to a catastrophic end, and that this involved gigantic floods which swept over the whole Earth. And in fact, during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, when Siberia was being kind of properly explored, they were finding vast numbers of bodies, frozen bodies or frozen bones, mainly of mammoths. And in fact, there was a flourishing trade in mammoth ivory from Siberia at the time. In fact, they were known as the ivory mines of Siberia. And a lot of the ivory used in piano keys, etc., in Europe at the time and North America came actually from Siberia, from mammoth ivory. And it was surmised at the time, the early 19th century, before Darwinism and Lyellism or uniformitarianism became prominent, or dominant, should I say. It was surmised that these animals had been swept from the face of the earth by giant waves. These were known as waves of translation. And there was a science, the science at that time was what was known as catastrophist. Past catastrophes were accepted because of the evidence that geologists and paleontologists were finding in the ground. But with the victory of Lyell, and then Charles Lyell, who was a Scottish lawyer, actually, but who had an abhorrence for the idea of catastrophes. It was a psychological abhorrence. And he revived an idea of an earlier Scottish thinker called Thomas Hutton, who claimed that although catastrophes happened in the past, Hutton said that the main forces shaping the Earth's history or the Earth's topography were actually forces which were now in operation. Lyell went a stage further. He said catastrophes of the type described in ancient texts and legends never happened at all, that basically the only forces shaping the Earth, the face of the Earth, were forces that we can observe happening in operation now. And this new idea was called uniformitarianism. And that began to take hold from the mid-19th century. And by the end of the 19th century, it was completely dominant. And catastrophism, which had previously been basically accepted by the greatest minds in Europe and America, it was decreed to be kind of a lunatic fringe idea. And that has been more or less the state of things for almost a century. Now, cracks have been appearing in the uniformitarian edifice recently, but we can talk about them later. So for the moment, I want to just emphasize that the evidence for these catastrophes, once you know what to look for and once your eyes are kind of opened, the evidence is actually everywhere you look, in mountain ranges, in valleys, everywhere. It was pointed out, for example, by the early catastrophists that mountain ranges had to have risen rapidly, because the jagged, rugged peaks that we see now, if it took millions of years to raise those, erosion would have worn them down before they could have risen. We're told now that the Himalayas, for example, rose 1 millimeter per century. And catastrophists were quick to point out, well, normal erosion of wind and rain and flooding would have worn those mountains away before they could have risen even. Whereas ancient legends told specifically of mountain ranges rising thousands of feet in a single night. And when you look at those rugged peaks, those needle-like peaks sometimes, they have catastrophe marked. It may as well be written all over them. And then in the valleys, you look in the valleys, you see wherever a river has cut away the clay from a riverbank, you can see round boulders and pebbles embedded in the clay. Now, stones can only be rounded by the action of water. So what put those rounded stones, those rounded boulders in the boulder clay? What put them there? How did that clay get there? How did those water-shaped stones get embedded in clay? Very often, hundreds of meters above the sea level, and thousands of kilometers sometimes from the ocean. So these are questions which are kind of ignored nowadays and generally overlooked. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. The evidence for these catastrophes is much more extensive than that, but we can talk about that in a minute. Any points there, Sean?
Yeah, so because I'm looking, so what we have then is Georges Cuvier.
Yeah.
The father of catastrophism.
Well, the father of paleontology.
Of paleontology, right?
He was a catastrophist, like basically all scientists at the time. He wasn't unusual. He was a kind of he was the norm at the time.
Mm-hmm. And then things quickly moved into the Lyell era, Charles Lyell and Darwin era, where they, I've heard, they looked at catastrophists as being like a biblical literalists.
Yeah.
And
well, then they tried to label them as that. Yes.
So then I guess the way that Lyell Darwinism looks at everything, the keys to the past are based on our present. We don't see things evolving. We don't see floods of great magnitude. We do see floods, though, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, etc. That the present is the keys to the past. I mean, that's just the way they look at it. And I guess then catastrophism just sort of just died out, until much more recently.
I don't think it just died out. I think it was killed off quite deliberately to actually ignore the mountains, quite literally mountains of evidence for these catastrophes. Took an effort. Why that happened is a very interesting question, but that belongs to the realm of psychology rather than science. Mm-hmm. But we can look at some of the evidence. First of all, for what Velikovsky was one of the people, and Gunnar Heinsohn and various others, but especially Velikovsky, wrote quite a lot about the most recent series of cosmic catastrophes which struck the Earth, and which he synchronized with the end of the Pleistocene and the beginning of the Neolithic era and the Bronze Ages. Okay, so he says the early man witnessed the last in these series of cosmic upheavals, which involved other bodies in the solar system. So these were cosmic catastrophes. Now, I don't want to get into the details of how he explained these catastrophes, because that's a question of cosmology and as I suppose planetary astrophysics. So I don't want to go into that. But I just want to look today at kind of 2 points: the evidence of geology and paleontology on the Earth, and the evidence from ancient tradition from various parts of the world, combined with now genetic evidence, which has begun to play a role in all of this as well. Mm-hmm. because as well as the complete extinction of species, many species at the end of the Pleistocene, there was the near extinction of many other species which did survive, but just by the skin of their teeth. These are now known as genetic bottlenecks. Huge numbers of modern animals, especially the larger type, have been recently shown, now that we have begun to study genetics in great detail over the past 20 years, it has been shown that huge numbers of animals of various species experienced a very serious genetic bottleneck just a few thousand years ago, basically at the end of the Pleistocene, where the surviving members of the entire species numbered no more than 3 or 4. That happened, for example, with the North American bison. I remember reading a report, I think it might have been about 15 or 20 years ago, which claimed that basically all modern bison are descended from a single female that survived something at the end of the Pleistocene. Okay? The cheetah, another example of a creature which experienced a very, very severe genetic bottleneck recently. Again, the genetic diversity of the cheetah is so limited that scientists have been forced to surmise that these animals must have experienced a near extinction event around the end of the Pleistocene, basically when many other animals didn't survive. These animals, just a handful survived, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. And from them, all modern cheetah are descended. Same with lions, African and Asian lions. Another major genetic bottleneck has been identified just a short few thousand years ago. It's surmised to be at the end of the Pleistocene when many other animals didn't survive. Okay, so in North America, for example, the horse was an American animal. It evolved in America. And during the Pleistocene, there were huge herds of American wild horses roaming around North America. These were exterminated down to the last one at the end of the Pleistocene. So that when the Spaniards brought horses over from Spain in the 15th and 16th centuries, the Mexicans, for example, the Aztecs, thought they were giant deer. And some of them even began to think, there was a rumor spread, I don't know how that the horse and man were one creature and that they kind of separated. But I think that may have been just more kind of a village talk among superstitious folks. But certainly they'd never seen horses before. But many of the Spanish horses escaped and quickly formed huge herds around North America, the descendants of the Mustang, proven that the American environment was eminently suited. The modern American environment was eminently suited for the horse. And yet, where did the earlier Native American horses go? You see, it's absurd to say they died because of climate change, which is a ridiculous statement. You know, if climate change is something that happens slow, or ice ages, you know, it's progressively colder and colder winter, they were just moved south as the ice sheets grew, and then reoccupied their places further north once the ice sheets melted. Same with the mammoth, same with the Smilodon, the saber-toothed cats, same with the cave bears, same with the American camels, same with the super bison, which was a huge form of bison, and all the other extinct Pleistocene creatures. They would just have moved south to get away from the cooling conditions, the gently cooling conditions. No, something extraordinary exterminated these animals. And the evidence is still very, very evident as soon as you look under the earth at the strata. Now, that's very, very clear in Alaska, for example, when you explore the permafrost there, because there the bones have not been eaten away by bacteria or by warmth. Yeah. Now here we have the muck deposits of Alaska, which is maybe up to 50 meters deep, frozen deposits of uprooted and splintered trees and the bodies of millions and millions of Pleistocene creatures of every kind, from every environment, bison, deer, carnivores like bears, mammoth, mastodon. Their bones are all smashed to pieces. Their bodies are ripped in pieces, but very often the flesh is frozen and fur can be seen. But they're dismembered, the bodies generally, just like the trees in which they're found, among which they're found the smashed, uprooted trees. And rock and sand and various other gravel debris, all wildly thrown together and frozen solid in these deep deposits in Alaska, which are still there. Okay, they're known as the muck deposits. So here we have some explorers with a partially frozen body of a mammoth. Mm-hmm. You can see the foot at the front still.
And I like to let everybody know I'm using these slides all in fair use. Uh-huh. These slides particularly came from the Malaga Bay website. That's Tim Collins' website. But everything I'm using is in fair use because some of these photos people have copyrights to, but it's all in fair use. Just want to let
that's the I want to speak about the Berezovka mammoth. That's from Siberia, that one. Mm-hmm. The Berezovka mammoth was found in 1901, as far as 1901. Its body was so well preserved that its last meal was still in its mouth and stomach, traces of the last meal. Now, being found in the permafrost, people would imagine, it was always very cold there. But what they found in the mammoth's mouth and stomach were buttercups, daisies, and other wildflowers in full bloom. This animal was grazing in a summer's day in a temperate climate, eating flowers and plants now which grow hundreds of miles south of where the mammoth's body was actually found. So these things were in full bloom. It was a summer's day. Buttercups and daisies don't flower in temperatures lower than about 15 degrees centigrade, or maybe a little bit underneath that. So, well above freezing point. This is a summer temperature you need. And yet his body was so perfectly preserved after thousands of years that its flesh could still be eaten. So this animal was grazing in a summer's day, and something happened. Something transported it and millions, billions of other creatures into the polar regions and froze them so quickly. Now that has to be flash frozen, it's called, to freeze flesh such that it can be preserved over long periods of times. You have to freeze it very, very quickly indeed in very cold temperatures. So from well above freezing in a summer's day to massively below freezing within maybe a couple of hours, a few hours, and the body perfectly preserved. And as I say, this one animal was only one of millions or possibly billions of these creatures which suffered the same fate. Some force lifted them. Forests, herds of animals, boulders, clay deposits, and threw them into the polar regions with immense force. Whole islands have been found in the Arctic Ocean above Siberia, composed almost entirely of frozen and uprooted trees, animal bodies, and sand and clay, frozen debris left behind by some catastrophic event. So the idea that these events are not, there's no evidence for them is nonsensical. I have yet to find an honest discussion of the problem of the contents of the stomachs of the mammoth and other Pleistocene animals who didn't have time even to digest their final meal before they were entombed and frozen, and placed in heaps, and their bodies smashed to pieces, and heaps and piles piled together with uprooted trees of forests of every kind, and other forms of debris. I've yet to find any honest discussion of this anywhere. It's what Velikovsky called a scotoma. It's a mental blockage. Modern scholars, modern paleontologists see it, but they don't see it. They're looking straight at it, but they don't see it somehow. They don't. It's almost like a psychological trauma from the past.
Right.
They can't see it. Their mind won't allow them to see it, and yet the evidence is staring them in the face. You know.
I have a
It's
question, a quick question. So, do you think that the animals like in Siberia and Alaska were indigenous to that area
oh yeah.
at all? Okay, but they were still
Well,
flung around. There's evidence of them being flung around,
they were
obviously.
indigenous, but they came from further south. They
Okay.
didn't come from the actual polar regions because an elephant needs a huge amount of calories every day, and they couldn't survive in the mosses and lichens, which reindeer, for example, can survive on. Elephants are big animals. So they survived in the forested regions, in the boreal forest, the pine forest, and the meadows there. So temperate, but not polar, but
Okay.
cool temperate climate. They survived, and all over Europe and all over North America. There were mammoths as far south as Texas and Mexico in North America. In fact, some of them were in South America as well. There were mammoth and mastodon even in South America. But they generally lived in temperate climates. Although they had fur, they weren't animals of the polar regions. No, that's a kind of a myth. They're found in the polar regions now, frozen bodies of them, but that's not where they lived. You know. And the evidence shows that they needed loads of a huge calorie intake every day, and that comes from grasses, flowers, and the leaves of deciduous trees more than anything.
So then it's so you saying then there's a combination of a cosmic catastrophe and which then caused the flooding and the really outrageous weather conditions then for this to happen. Okay.
Yeah. There was some force shook the earth basically off its axis and caused immense tidal waves to sweep the world. Now, Velikovsky surmised a comet. I don't want to get into the details of what the comet was and what size the comet was. And he surmised the Earth going through the sort of the gas tail of this comet, and that the gas tail was composed of hydrogen, and this mixed with the oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere and fell as water, combined electrically with the hydrogen and form water, which fell as huge rain deposits. Now, it is a fact that the modern sea level is well over 100 meters higher than during the Pleistocene. The Pleistocene, North America was bigger during the Pleistocene. Like the island of Newfoundland off Canada was part of the continent, and the Grand Banks, the shallow continental shelf, which goes beyond Newfoundland into the Atlantic, that was dry land. The River Hudson, which flows through New York, was out beyond New York Harbor. The valley of the Hudson continues to the end of the continental shelf, another 100 miles out into the ocean, which was at that time during the Pleistocene was dry land. So the oceans were about 100 meters more shallow, something deep in the oceans. Now, of course, we're now told that, this was the melting ice at the end of the Ice Age. But that's not what the ancient legends recorded. They recorded a world being flooded by water from either from underneath the earth, the fountains of the deep, or from space, just rain coming down on the earth. So, and very often combined with massive tectonic movements of tidal waves and gigantic mountain building and earthquake, the shaking of the earth. A Mexican, I don't know if it's Aztec or Maya legend, told of a time when the world went dark for 9 days, and at the end of the 9 days, people saw a light in the distance and heard a tremendous roaring sound. As the light got closer, they saw it was the crest of a gigantic wave. And they said everyone would have died, but the fact that the mountains rose under their feet above the level of the onrushing tide and saved some of them. Many did die, of course, but some of them were saved. So this kind of story is found basically everywhere. Analogous or similar stories. Sometimes the ancestor hero survives in a boat, and sometimes hangs onto a log. Sometimes he climbs to the top of a high mountain and escapes the onrushing waters that way. So that there are various different or slightly different accounts, but they all agree to kind of a terrible darkness, waters, the ocean rising, and most of the earth and most of the animal life extinguished. As I say, it's a story which is found in Mesopotamia and in Egypt as elsewhere.
I want to kind of jump forward, and we'll jump back and look at some more evidence. But then I guess from the modern geologist way of looking at it, or even anthropologists, if you will, paleontologists, these events of the late Pleistocene era happen around 10,500 BCE.
Yeah.
That would create a problem then, because there's a dark age of human history, if you will. We're looking at the rise of the civilizations around roughly 3,500 to about 3,000 BCE.
Yeah.
Doesn't that become a big problem? Because then how would the people remember anything for 7,000 years, essentially? How does that work?
Yeah. This is essentially the first of these fake dark ages created by this modern fictitious chronology, which has found its way cast in concrete in the textbooks, and nothing seems to be able to move. Velikovsky wrote about the Pleistocene extinctions in some detail in his book Earth in Upheaval, which was published in 1956. And by the way, Albert Einstein regarded this as the latter volume as Einstein's best book, and he thought that was the one that should have been published first, because in Earth in Upheaval he presents the paleontological and geological evidence for a catastrophic end to the Pleistocene and a catastrophic explanation for the extinction of most of the Pleistocene animals. Now, Velikovsky, one of the things that he emphasizes in Earth in Upheaval is that the evidence suggests that these events did not happen 10 or 12,000 years ago, as we're now told. In fact, no more than 5,000 years ago, maximum 3, 4, 5,000 years. This was shown by a huge body of evidence regarding the rate of salinification of lakes, the rate of the buildup of the rate at which rivers, gorges, for example, the gorge at Niagara Falls is cut away by the water, the rate of the growth of the Mississippi Delta, etc. I could quote a couple of these articles or parts, kinds of evidence, There was, let me see, I just want to I just want to look at, where is it now? Right. Velikovsky stressed that in many localities, geologists found to their astonishment that lakes, river valleys, deltas, and cataracts were often no more than 3,000 to 4,000 years old. Often it was possible to be much more precise, and it was discovered that a great many of these features were between 3,500 and 4,000 years old. Right, one example was that there are two examples, Albert and Summer Lakes in South Oregon. These are regarded as once large remnants of a once large glacial lake, Lake Chiraucan. W. Van Winkle of the United States Geology Survey examined the saline or the salt content of the two lakes and wrote, quote, a conservative estimate of the age of Summer and Albert lakes based on their concentration and area, the composition of the influent waters, and the rate of evaporation is 4,000 years. Okay. Velikovsky comments the fact that Van Winkle, startled by his own result, conjectured that salt deposits of the early Chiraucan Lake may be hidden beneath the bottom sediments of the present Albert and Summer Lakes. Yet the same astonishing result was obtained for lake after lake. For example, Owens Lake in California, which lies to the east of the Sequoia National Park, was examined by H.S. Gale with the object of determining its content of chlorine and sodium. These were compared with the chlorine and sodium of the feeder river, and the conclusion reached was that the river required only 4,200 years to supply the chlorine and 3,500 years to supply the sodium. So this was the same in lake after lake, Lake Lahontan, etc. Now, we go on to geological investigation of the Mississippi River and its valley, produced the same kind of results. In 1860, A.A. Humphreys and H.L. Abbott of the U.S. Army Corps of Topographical Engineers extensively studied the river and its delta. They determined the delta's age by dividing its average annual growth into the distance from the continental shoreline. They concluded, quote, adopting this rate of progress, 262 feet per annum, 4,400 years have elapsed since the river began to advance into the Gulf. So, and it was a similar situation with Niagara Falls. Now, Charles Lyell, the father of uniformitarianism, visited Niagara Falls, and he inquired of a local how the rate at which the St. Lawrence River digs into the rock, and deepens the gorge per year. So he was informed that the cataract retreats about 3 feet per year. However, taking the attitude that the natives of a country are likely to exaggerate, Lyell announced that 1 foot per year would be a more likely estimate, without any evidence whatsoever. From this, he concluded that the St. Lawrence River would have needed over 35,000 years from the time the land was freed from the ice cover and the water started its work of erosion to cut the gorge from Queenstown to the place it occupied in the year of Lyell's visit. Since that time, this span, of time, has often been mentioned in textbooks as the length of time from the end of the glacial period. Yet subsequent research proved that the local interviewed by Lyell had not exaggerated but underestimated the rate of erosion. Records were to show that since 1764, the falls had retreated from Lake Ontario towards Lake Erie at the rate of 5 feet per year. If the process of wearing down the rock had gone on at this rate, from the time of the disappearance of the ice cover 7,000 years ago, 7,000 years would have been sufficient to do the work. However, if in the beginning, when the ice first melted, the river system was swollen with extra water and detritus, the erosion rate must have been much more rapid, and the age of the gorge must be reduced further. According to G.F. Wright, the author of The Ice Age in North America, 5,000 years may be regarded as adequate. However, even this estimate needs to come down, for it was subsequently discovered that a large part of the falls predated the Ice Age. So again and again, geology showed that 5,000 years was sufficient to account for what we now find in terms of rivers, in terms of lakes, in terms of erosion, in terms of the sedimentation and the salinization of various bodies of water, etc. Now, I have to state that since that time, of course, other so-called methods of dating have been applied and have only confused the issue, including radiocarbon and ice core and lake varve systems. Now, I don't want to. I've been criticised for this before by dismissing these methods out of hand. All I need to say, or should say at the moment, is that these systems have been unconsciously or not used to reinforce already pre-existing ideas about the antiquity of the end of the Pleistocene or the end of the Ice Age, whatever you want to call it, and that they are not the iron cast, reliable systems that they are claimed to be. I can quote experts in the field, real experts as opposed to popularists and documentary channels or anything like that, who freely admit that there are serious problems with all these methods, and that it's very difficult to account for all the factors which can cause a major question mark over all of them, radiocarbon included. So maybe we could do an entire program on that.
Right.
Because believe me, I have the data. I have the data available to show that these are not the accurate measuring rods that they're claimed to be by any means.
Yeah, I remember a email group email. You, Gunnar Heinsohn was still alive, and one of the Larsons, I believe, was in that, and you guys were really going at it about the difficulties in these dating methods and how they don't always add up the way we think they add up, and there's always different results at times with different scientists. Which leaves me, dendrochronology and things of that nature, which leaves me wondering, why we have different results from different scientists. And just to put it in a nutshell, and I've seen the evidence, and I'm like, shouldn't things be the same or close to the same? Well, no, not always. Not always at all.
I'll give you an example. Like, for example, mammoth bones were discovered in Wrangel Island off the north coast of Siberia. And they were dated to 4,000 years ago, 2000 BC.
Right.
But then they tried, because of this was such a recent result, this was radiocarbon dating. They claimed for about 2 decades in the textbooks that these were dwarf mammoths that somehow survived much longer than other mammoths in isolation in this tiny barren island, by the way. But it's now freely admitted, if you look, they've finally had to admit that these were not dwarf mammoths, these were full-grown mammoths, and but it's not widely talked about, the radiocarbon date from Wrangel Island, because it so comprehensively contradicts everything else that is stated. And very often they've found similar results all over the place, but they're just not published generally when they're found.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to explain away the Wrangel Island dates by saying that these, as I say, were isolated dwarf mammoths, but they now admit they weren't dwarf mammoths, they were full-size mammoths. Because the evidence, I think they found the bones of a couple of baby mammoths, and so they tried to suggest that these were, and then they found the bones of adult mammoths. So they had to admit, actually, they were just, they were adult mammoths, and they only died out 4,000 years ago. So what they do is they tend, if a date from radiocarbon or whatever, it doesn't agree with textbook expectations, it's just not published. They just, and then they desperately look for some sample where it does, and then they publish that. They keep searching until they find a result, and they usually can, because the possibilities of contamination and distorted results are endless with radiocarbon. I mean, we can discuss it at some other stage.
Mm-hmm. You want to take a look at some of the flooding evidence then in the northeast of the United States, Washington State. This is where they considered the ice sheet to be in the northeast. There was an ice dam. I think they were in several locations, but this is the glacial lake Missoula and the channeled scablands. So the scablands, we're going to get into that. Well, there's an ice dam, and then obviously from meltdown, if you will, the ice gives way, and we have what we have.
Yeah.
Let me see what else I have.
This was the Lake Missoula flood. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was in the 1930s. This was finally accepted as evidence of a cataclysmic flood, but they still try to make it a local one, because to accept a worldwide event is just completely outside the thinking of the whole of modern establishment academia. So although they admit to a gigantic cataclysmic flood, they claim it's still local. But if we look at some of the evidence of the, what the flooding left in this area,
mm-hmm.
it's evident that, local or not, it was a gigantic cataclysmic flood. So here we can see where water has scoured out channels. And in other places, there's like giant ripples that you see on a beach where there's sand, where waves form the sand. Have you got any of them? It's kind of a ripple.
I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Hold on.
So these are strata.
This is a wide angle, but
you can see the kind of a ripple there.
Sediment bars, essentially.
Yeah. So they're like ripples that we find on a beach with sand, except these are 4 or 5 meters high. They're small hills, and they form like ripples in a giant beach. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the evidence, that there was some cataclysmic flood here at some stage is overwhelming. And I mean, they found the bones of mammoths, and they found the bones of whales high up in the American continent. In Antarctica, they find to this day the frozen bodies of whales and seals and fish hundreds of meters above sea level and thousands of meters away from the ocean, in Antarctica. I remember in 1995, I think it was, David Attenborough was doing a documentary for the BBC called Life in the Freezer about life in Antarctica. And he came to this valley deep inside Antarctica where there was no ice. He says the power of the winds prevented the formation of any ice or snow on the rock, and the rocks were bare. It was like a moonscape, and there, lying in this moonscape, hundreds or maybe thousands, hundreds of miles anyway from the ocean, was the frozen body of a seal, perfectly preserved. And now the obvious question that you or I would have asked is, how the hell did it get there? He may have asked that off camera, but that wasn't allowed on camera. He just says, you can see how the frozen body of the body has been mummified by the cold. The intense cold has mummified and perfectly preserved this seal. But he never asked the obvious question, how the hell did it get there,
Right.
Hundreds of meters above sea level and maybe thousands of miles from the ocean, and, it was one of many creatures from the Southern Ocean found frozen on the Antarctic continent. How did they get there? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have some more of the mammoth, baby mammoth, North America.
So a lot of the flesh still preserved, and sometimes the fur even. Depends how close to the surface their bodies were.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to find the ones who are closest to the surface, so there's usually a bit of decay of the flesh. Further down, they're better preserved, but the bodies are usually dismembered. Their arms and legs ripped off, and as I say, they're found smashed together among uprooted trees of various kinds, tree trunks and tree branches and roots, all smashed together, as if thrown together by some immense force, like water, like onrushing water. So the head of a saber-toothed cat.
Saber-tooth. So would the saber-tooth, in your opinion, be directly related to what animal did you mention that came after the saber-tooth? You didn't say the cheetah.
Well, they're a form of cat, but they became extinct. They didn't survive. But there were African-type lions in North America at the time, with the mane, the big African-type mane, etc. And they were wiped out to the last. And there were even types of mice. There were small mammals that became extinct at the time, but they tended to survive the extinction better, the smaller animals better. And Velikovsky explained that with the fact that smaller animals can more easily find refuges during times of cosmic, catastrophic events like floods or earthquakes or whatever. They can find nooks and crannies to hide in. Whereas bigger animals, their bones are more easily damaged and broken during.
Here's some Gigantopithecus, teeth. And you see there's a scale on the bottom, 10 millimeters. So I think of a 10 millimeter socket right away, which is fairly small but large for teeth, essentially.
Yeah, well, now, that's another point that we have to mention. Not only do ancient traditions talk about the flood, but they also have a memory of extinct animals. Now, in the Himalayan foothills during the Pleistocene, there was a giant ape called Gigantopithecus. And it's quite evident that the Yeti is kind of a folk memory of the Gigantopithecus. An absolutely enormous ape, much bigger than a modern gorilla, which lived at that time. Then there was in central Siberia, Central Asia, around Kazakhstan, etc. There was a rhinoceros-type creature with a single horn growing out of his forehead called Elasmotherium. So, kind of a cross between a horse type and a rhinoceros type, but with a straight horn coming out of the forehead, and it's surmised that was the origin of the unicorn. And as I say, the North American natives had clear recall of mammoths. One legend talked of a huge animal that persecuted human beings, and it had a kind of an arm growing out of its nose or something like that, or the side of its head, an extra arm. So it's clearly an elephant's trunk. And so some of these animals of legend and myth seem to be folk memories of Pleistocene creatures. In the Bible it says before the flood there were giants on the earth in those days, and that's people have erroneously assumed that means human giants, but Velikovsky surmised that it meant giants of the animal kingdom, which I would tend to suggest is correct. Now again, how was that memory preserved over 10,000 years? Much more likely just a few thousand years. As folk traditions of these extinct creatures, a memory of them in folk legend. So the evidence that these events or this event happened is fairly overwhelming. Now, was there a man called Noah and an ark? Of course not. That's just a myth. It's the Jewish retelling of the myth. No more valid as history than any of the other, the Babylonian or the Egyptian or the Aztec or Chinese or any other myths about the flood. These are popular folk retellings of an ancient story. The first event in human memory, if you like, the first event of history, but not thousands and thousands of years before the rise of the first civilization, just a few centuries before the rise of the first civilization. And in fact, according to both Velikovsky and Heinzen, the custom of blood sacrifice and sacrifice to the celestial gods was initiated because of the flood and because of subsequent cosmic catastrophes. The fear of the recurrence of these events prompted people to establish the rites of blood sacrifice. And that's recorded in the Noah myth, in the Gilgamesh myth of Mesopotamia, and in all the ancient legends. The first blood sacrifices were carried out after the flood. God was offered the blood of some of the animals that survived the flood, or the gods were offered the blood of these creatures, or of human beings in many instances. So priest kingship and blood sacrifice were a direct result of these cosmic catastrophes. And the urge to build temples and build pyramids. An altar is just a high place. That's all it means in Latin, altus. And to build high places up near where the gods were, up in the heavens, where these sacrifices would be performed. This was behind the urge to build pyramids, to build mounds, to take victims up to the top of mountains and sacrifice them there, usually with a flint knife, of course, as it was very specifically pointed out. And ironically, it was from this urge that some of the fundamentals of early civilization developed. The idea of building in stone, the idea of keeping an eye on the calendar and mathematics, record keeping, etc., etc.
Right.
Came from this urge to offer sacrifices.
I'm going to put up some comments, questions here too. Also, Wave of Mutilation. Thanks again for watching the show. How is a flood a cosmic event?
Well, the evidence, as I say, for destruction is so colossal that it cannot be explained by forces within the earth. We have to call on forces exterior to the earth. We're talking about massive tectonic movement. Darwin himself noted in South America along the Pacific coast of the Andes, he says a raised beach 5,000 feet up, complete with sand, seashells, shingle. It ran the whole length of the South American continent. but there were no intermediate beaches. And he says to raise the continent so rapidly, he says some immense force had to have happened. And we now talk about the Pacific plate ramming against the South American plate, with great speed and rising the Andes. And of course, that accords completely with Inca legend, how the mountains rose in a vast paroxysm. Now, even in Homer's Iliad, no, the Odyssey, um, the god of earthquakes is Poseidon, but he's also the god of the sea, strangely enough. And Poseidon is the enemy of Odysseus, and Odysseus is helped by the sea kings. What's their name again? From the island of, I can't remember their name of their island. Phaeacia, is it? And Poseidon is infuriated by them giving help to Odysseus because he has killed Poseidon's son, the Cyclops. He has blinded him. And it says Poseidon threatened the Phaeacian king. He says, I will surround your city, he says, with a range of high mountains, and I will cut you off from the sea if you don't stop helping this man. So the god of earthquakes is connected directly with ocean tides and with mountain building. He can raise mountains overnight. And again, that's found all over Greek legend, and legend all over the world. Mountain ranges rising. Now, what forces could do that? Nothing within the earth, really. So when you find also all over the world a unanimous statement that some of the heavenly bodies are involved, that they brought the flood. Very often the goddess Venus, or Ishtar as she's called, or in Egypt Hathor, the goddess, brings the flood. In the Native American accounts, it's invariably the morning star, Venus, who brings the flood and who destroys mankind. So when you combine that, Velikovsky combined these things together and came to the conclusion that some form of comet of substantial size had interacted with the Earth, causing massive disruption in the biosphere and in the plate tectonics of the planet.
Mm-hmm. Another comment, Gabriel Diaz. Thank you. I read your books. I'm a big fan. And
many thanks.
Yeah, I don't know if I pronounce this right. Does the expanding Earth theory hold any water for either of you?
No, honestly, I think it's way out. Just, I mean, you don't have to. I mean, Occam's law is if things can be explained simply by what the people recorded, what the evidence says is we don't need expanding Earth. We just look at, what's going on in the actual solar system and the evidence of geology on the Earth,
Mm-hmm.
It's just a way out theory, which I don't
Yeah,
reckon.
I've heard of it. I don't know how I feel about it. Technically, to be honest with you, I've listened. I'm not sure. Maybe not. Don't know. I mean, personally, I
Yeah,
don't know. I'm not
yeah.
sure. See if I have anything else here. Draconis Skinthicus, you sirs know about Jason of Archaics. Somebody's asked that before. I'm not too familiar. He puts together catastrophe chronologies. He says about Phoenix, Nemesis, X, Nibiru, dark satellite events, destructions, burnings. We should make a podcast. I'm not familiar with Archaics. That question was asked before.
Yeah, we'll have a look at them. I've
Yeah,
never heard. I've
yeah.
never heard of them, to be honest.
I'll give a shout out to Anachronistic Affliction. He subscribed to this channel. He has a channel, Anachronistic Affliction. He has 169 videos. We have probably 20 maybe. But he makes podcasts about most of this subject matter. He also includes Fomenko's work. That's something me and Emmett have talked about a little bit. I'm not as familiar with Fomenko generally as familiar, but not as much as Gunnar Heinsohn's work and Emmett's work. It's just something to think about maybe for the future shows. I don't have his book or any of his books. I just like to see it on the other video channels, and it's very interesting to me. It's still interesting in terms of compilation of text in the late medieval period, even towards the Renaissance era. That becomes really fascinating to me because a lot of channels they talk about a lot about the first 3 to 4 centuries AD with the biblical New Testament records, and that's it. Well, what happens afterwards, and then again, how did these long time, fragments become the Bibles that we have today from about the 14th century moving forward? That remains a big puzzling quagmire to me.
Yeah.
Nothing was consistent throughout the ages. And then presto, bam, here comes the printing press, and we have everything right in front of us, records of the past that still derive from fragments somehow that we have magically put together and seem to have all the history down pat. Nonetheless, just giving Anachronistic Affliction a shout out. See if we have anything else here. See, pardon me, because I don't have the best eyesight here. I don't know, Emmett, you have anything else you want to touch on before we? And we like to keep the shows generally to about an hour.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of time myself personally to listen to 2 and 3 hour videos, but an hour to me is pretty direct and to the point. We try to get our points across to the people in a short period of time.
So basically, the first Dark Age, as I say, as you mentioned, created by this fictitious chronology is right at the beginning. So we have this thousands of years Dark Age, where nothing much is supposed to have happened between the end of the Pleistocene and the beginning of the literate civilizations. 7,000 years. So this is not supported by the actual evidence. We're talking about events that live on in human memory and didn't happen 10, 20,000 years ago, just a few thousand years ago. Memories of extinct animals, DNA evidence showing massive genetic bottlenecks just 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, total extinction of many species, the beginning of priest kingship and blood sacrifice. Shortly after that, the rise of the first literate civilizations, record keeping, agriculture, etc. So after this cataclysm, the survivors were traumatized and they had to be inventive to survive. They had to invent new methods. The bow comes in. Previous to that, it was only the spear. Now we have the bow, the domestication of the dog. The dog is domesticated as a hunting companion. Mesolithic develops quickly into Neolithic. Cattle are no longer just hunted, they're now domestic. They're kept along with the dog. The first Neolithic settlements occur, and this all occurs within a couple of centuries, not thousands of years. And finally, the Neolithic settlements develop into large, substantial towns. The gathering part, of crops and things, people think, well, just plant them. And again, as I say, after the cataclysm, people have to be inventive, and they invent, and they develop new methods of survival, new methods of hunting, new methods of food access. Agriculture is invented, first herding agriculture, and then planting agriculture, the development of large towns, and finally cities. And this is all accompanied by these iconography of the star worship, and a serpent god appears, and blood sacrifice and priest kingship appears, and large societies develop very, very quickly because the agriculture can support far bigger populations than the old hunter-gatherer type of life. And we then have the beginning of literate civilization, but not thousands of years after the end of the Pleistocene, just a few hundred.
Right. I'll throw a quick curveball as the last question / statement. Then is Göbekli Tepe as old as it's claimed to be? We see shows about it on the internet and YouTube all the time. Is Göbekli Tepe like still this ancient 10,500 BCE culture?
This is more nonsense. The iconography of Göbekli Tepe clearly places it contemporary with or near contemporary with early dynastic Egypt and Mesopotamia. They claim it's pre-pottery, but now they admit, well, we actually did find some pottery at Göbekli Tepe. Mm-hmm. So it either comes immediately before one of the icons at Karahan Tepe, which is contemporary with Göbekli Tepe, is a god or a deity holding his erect penis. Now that is only the only other place is found in First Dynasty Egypt or late pre-dynastic Egypt, where the god Men is portrayed holding his erect penis. Mm-hmm. So clearly this is contemporary with early dynastic Egypt or nearly contemporary. It's not pre-pottery, it's early pottery. It's not 10,000 years old. It's just at the same time as First Dynasty Egypt or immediate pre-First Dynasty Egypt, right, and pre-First Dynasty Mesopotamia, Sumeria.
Right. Also, because there's a handbag in Göbekli Tepe also. Yeah. So then it would have to be like, again, about a 7,000 year gap between somebody saying, hey, you know what? I think a handbag would look really nice as an icon. So again, that's again, the scotoma, we'll say that Velikovsky talks about in Mankind and Amnesia.
They see the evidence, but they don't see it because their mind doesn't allow them to see it or recognize it. Yeah.
Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we'd like to say farewell until next time. Emmett, thanks again for coming on. Appreciate you, Sean. Yeah.
Okay. Speak later. Bye.
Yeah.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.